Okay, today we're here with Ross Klavan, who is a screenwriter, novelist, and teacher in the Wilkes program, mentor of many of the major mentor of the screenwriters at Wilkes. Welcome, Ross.
Thank you, Phil. Good to see you.
You too. Yeah, we're across town, so there we are. But Ross, of course, one of the mysterious things to all of us is, what does a screenwriter do?
Well, a screenwriter does a number of things in terms of writing, other than absorbing comments from producers, directors, and stars, or fending them off, or begging for work is another thing that a screenwriter does. But in terms of writing, you either walk in with an original screenplay, that much as you would with a novel or a story or a poem, and try to sell it or have it worked on by a studio, or you're brought in on either a book, magazine article, or an existing screenplay to develop and work off of that. And at the end of a long process, they green light it, hopefully, and then it becomes a movie.
Wow. So, and you've been involved in both from the writing of the original and also development of other plays. How is that is that the same kind of activity, or?
Good question. When you have your own work, especially if it was something that you wrote that meant a lot to you, not just a frivolous film that you happened to put together, but if something that really meant something to you, you have to work with whatever possible alterations they're going to ask you for, some of which can be very good. Sometimes they make it better. I don't want to, have a stereotypical vision of working on a film. However, where they want to develop it in a way that is you feel detrimental, you have to really be careful of how you deal with it. I mean, I'll give you just one example. In the film that I did called Tigerland, which was based on my own experience and came out to starred Colin Farrell, it went through a process of development where development people sat in a room. These were a bunch of people who were fairly young, and they started to say, this is a story about the military, they started to say, well, we can't tell who the good soldiers are and who the bad soldiers are. I said, I'm sorry, I don't understand. They said, well, we want to know that the good soldiers will survive and the bad soldiers, one of the bad soldiers will be killed. And I said, well, you've just countered, 3,000 years of human writing about war, plus which what you're saying. And then they said, no, we want to. And I said, well, what you're saying is that there's a monument in Washington with the names of 55,000 bad soldiers on it. I don't think you want to say that. And then they calmed down, But you have to really, at times, work with it. And then there were times where the director, Joel Schumacher, surprisingly gave me a couple of ideas that were excellent.
Wow. And so, in other words, in the case that you just brought up, they were not looking necessarily at your script as much as they were looking at a predetermined formula for how a movie about war would go?
Yeah, I found this more true in America than I have overseas. I've worked with English companies, German companies, British, I said English companies. New Zealand, did some work with them, and I found that for some reason in America, not always, but in the big studio end of it, it gets into periodically a discussion of its character, but really what it is marketability. In other words, the character might do this in the best script possible, but if they feel that the audience doesn't want to see that, they might back away from it. Or if they want to continue a character, into a series. I found that much less true working overseas. In fact, in England, I got the feeling that these guys had narrative in their bones, and they worked specifically on character. What would this guy do? What would he, So yeah, you run into various forms of that.
Wow. Now, I know also, and I've heard from students of yours, how the incredible technical knowledge, moment by moment, of making this screenwriting. How did you get involved in that process, and how did you learn it?
I actually briefly went to film school for about 2 years, and then I switched over to journalism. Loved the movies, saw all kinds of film. And originally I wanted to write novels, which I eventually did, but I felt that the main influence in literature was film and not necessarily straight literature, that the movies really had an influence. So I wanted to learn about screenwriting. At the time, there were not a lot of screenplays published. And one of the first that came out was the film Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, written by William Goldman. And there is a conversational style that he writes in. And I can remember literally being on an airplane reading this and suddenly having a moment of saying, I see what he's doing. I understand this. I understand how to do it. And from there, it really was a process of learning the format and watching films and trying to figure out what they were doing and how to steal from them or copy them.
Wow. Wow. I have to interject here, Joyce, James Joyce, after writing the chapter on music in Ulysses, says that he was no longer able to enjoy music. Has the screenwriting changed your appreciation of films?
I usually tell the students who are coming into the foundation class that I'm going to ruin the movies for them for a while. And what happens is later on, I think, once they're ruined, then you come back to it with a greater appreciation for it.
Okay. That's very interesting. Another comment that students made that I thought was really amazing, and just to talk about the commercial aspect, on the one hand, of course, you're up against these huge commercial obstacles and expectations. And I remember one student in the 616 class talking about it and saying, so frustrating, you have to work with all these other people and you have to, meet their expectations and try to somehow circumvent what they want. And so it was really going on a good long rant.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no money in it. And that was the whole thing. And finally I said, so, all right, well, why do you do it? And he said, oh, I love it. And I thought, oh my God, the poor fellow's a poet,
Well, yeah.
In some ways, I feel that those two genres, as much as they may be stereotypically opposed, share a little bit of lunacy in getting involved in them because of all of the things that you mentioned.
I think that's true. Poets do very well in screenwriting, in fact, because they have an experience and love of images and the careful use of language, and which you really have to be adept at for a screenplay. But what you just said actually reminds me of the oldest joke in show business. Is a guy goes to the circus and he sees the man who sweeps up the elephant manure. And the guy is coming by sweeping up this elephant manure and he's saying, I hate this job. This is the worst job I've ever had. I can't stand it. It's terrible. And the guy calls him and says, you hate the job. Why don't you quit? And he says, what, and leave show business? So,
right. Exactly.
The same thing.
Right. Yeah, no, and that makes sense because, somebody said with the novel, and of course you're a novelist too, when the novel begins, the clock starts ticking, and metaphorically that makes sense. There's a narrative, but literally with a screenplay,
right?
Literally, the clock does start ticking, and you've got 1 hour and 48 minutes, or whatever the format may be. And what kind of revelations and pressures do you find that extremely strict convention has on you?
Well, as you say, film takes place in time. This may change as people are able to stop films on DVD or streaming and go back and look at things and approach them more as books. But in its purest state, film takes place in time. And what that means is people have to understand what you're doing as the film goes along. And if you're going to lose them, you have to let them know you're losing them, or let them know you're being ambiguous, because if they're really lost, while they're trying to figure out what's going on, the story continues. And once they're that lost, they get up and leave.
Right, right, right. Okay. Do you write with certain actors in mind?
I never did that. I know people who do. Um, Sometimes you work off of a character, type of character. In other words, I mean, film like fiction is partly about film, not completely, but partly. And I think that oftentimes, for instance, an easy example would be a detective story. There is a kind of stereotypical detective that you might reference, stay away from, try to get a new angle on, or something like that. So you're working more, I think, off of stock characters.
I see. Um, and how is the different posture that you adopt when you're invited to develop a film? What is that process like? You're given a manuscript, perhaps given a screenplay.
Very often what you do is you walk in with the screenplay your original screenplay that you loved, and you present it. If you're lucky enough to get a meeting with the director, the producer, and they say, "Thank you very much, this is fantastic." And you say, "We've been working on something else. We want you to take a look at this."
Oh,
And you either end up with a script that they've got partly written, or it's got a draft of that they don't quite like, and they're bringing you in for particular changes, or what they call a page one rewrite, which is complete rewrite. Um, sometimes they'll give you a magazine article or a nonfiction book and say, "What's your take on this? Can you give us some ideas or develop a script?" I was given an article one time to make a film up from, and went to the extent of writing the entire outline of a film, character outlines, everything, and got into the meeting. And within literally about 45 seconds of the meeting, the producer said, "I got to stop you there. You've done us a great service." And I said, "Really, what?" And he said, "You've shown us that this film is way too expensive for us to make. So, thank you very much."
And I hope you charged him for that.
No, they pay for your parking, I think, in that case.
Well, you are a poet, Ross. Um, but that's amazing. I've heard just stories about that too. People saying, "Well, we want to move your movie to another period or another time, or we want to take out this or take out that," just purely because of the expense. Because obviously, in making a movie, you're literally making a world, not just recreating it imaginatively, but building buildings and
Right.
exploding them and doing
I
them.
think it was
So,
William Goldman somewhere said, I mean, he's, an older screenwriter, or a late screenwriter at this point, but he said, we have to keep in mind that if you sit down at your computer and write 5,000 horses come over a hill, somewhere somebody's going to say, how do we do
how about 3 donkeys?
Right.
Very interesting. I mean, that interaction, not, in some of the other, I've been talking to some folks who, we've been talking about the interaction between aesthetics and commercialism. This certainly brings in another dynamic and another way of looking at it. And I wonder, just as in formal, strict poetry, a lot of times that form is so imposing that it actually generates new possibilities and alternative ways of thinking of the world. For instance, the 5,000 horses, that's a technical problem, but it's also an aesthetic problem, isn't it?
Right.
To have to say, well, now how do I get these 5,000 horses without actually the horse flesh?
Right. And in film, you can say, maybe we just hear them.
Okay, there you go.
All kinds of things can happen like that.
Right, right. I'm still thinking of you in that office and getting your parking paid. And we were talking before the recording a little bit about, one of the things that interns do in the Wilkes program is this thing that I've just found to be really miraculous and humbling, which are these coverages.
Mm-hmm.
And why I say that is because as a publisher and editor myself, I mean, I've got 2 modes. Either I love you or you're gone. And I mean, I just, no, 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 I love you. I don't really spend a lot of time. And I know I'm bad. I'm a very bad man. There are editors who are much better about rejecting, and they write nice rejection letters. But even nice rejection letters, might go a page. These coverages,
Mm-hmm.
what's going on with the coverages, Ross?
Coverage is basically a reader's report. The writer, for the most part, never sees it. Only it's for internal use. In fact, I brought along here a coverage from a novel called The Dark Fields, which was eventually made into the movie Limitless. And
I saw that movie.
Yeah, and the way this worked was the author of this book, Alan Glynn, and I were represented by the same agent. He called, the agent called me up and said, I have a novel I think would make a great movie. Would you like to be attached to it? So I read it. I thought, this is an easy film. It'll be great. It'll be work. Book was good. I went into Miramax, and they read it and eventually bought it. But in the process, they had it, a guy give coverage to it. And this is the coverage. See, it's got 4 pages of densely single-spaced summary, and then 1 page of comment that the person doing the coverage offered. And this is what the students would be doing also. You know, this is a strong drama thriller that expands upon a great high concept premise, and once it's up to speed, we're hooked in, that kind of thing. You know, should they do it as a movie? It's basically your suggestion to them about whether to buy this property and make it into a film or not. Well, usually it's not.
I see. Well, I guess the logistics of it is also confounding to me, because usually it's not. I could have that tattooed. You know, I mean, you know, there's literally hundreds and hundreds of rejections for every acceptance. So they can't be doing coverages like that dense for all of these unsolicited manuscripts.
No, sometimes they know from the moment you open your mouth, they don't want it, or they know that they've already done a film like that recently and they don't want to do another one, but they like you and they like your work, come in with another idea. Anything can happen. But if they like the writer who brings in the project, they will probably go further and do coverage of it.
How do they get to like that writer?
They see his work with him or her.
Okay.
If there's also, at one end of the spectrum would be people who write films that make a lot of money. They instantly like you then. A little less sure is whether you've been critically praised and won awards. So there's always, in the film business, I think there's always the mercantile element. Although one of the things that's happening now more and more is the ability to actually make a film is becoming incredibly easy. And it's, people make films now on phones. They make films that, are on television or stream, make commercials, things like that. So obviously you're probably not going to have tens of millions of dollars to work with, but if you really want to make a film, you can do it.
That's parallel to, of course, the same things happening in the book business, where the technology of making a book is so easy, but the barrier there is distribution.
Right. True in films also. True in films also.
Right. Okay, well, I'm an unknown screenwriter, young screenwriter who wants to make, a movie about Irish goblins on Mars. And how do I do that, Ross?
I call my secretary and say, "How did he get in here?" I love your idea.
Let's do lunch.
Let's do lunch. And then over lunch, you tell me your ideas. And what I might say from the beginning is, do you have pages? Which means, do you have a treatment?
Okay.
And a treatment is sort of a cross between an outline and a short story. It's part short story and part sales sheet. You would pitch the movie to me, give me the pitch, and you would say, okay, we start off with a shot on Mars, a big red planet, and we see a firestorm coming, something goes on like that. And then you would give me anywhere from between 5 to 35 pages of a description of the film the way you see it, and I would read that and think it was fantastic. Probably pass it along to a couple of other people just to get other opinions, and then we would sign you to a contract.
Based upon just the 35 pages.
Yeah, I mean that's done. Well, you were saying if somebody walked in without a script, I mean he might say, I like that idea, give me a script. But usually, see, they don't like to read all that much, and if you give him, if you were to give him a treatment and he had seen a script of yours where he knew you could write, that might be enough. In other words, a lot of money gets passed around in the film business usually, and they want to make sure that you're going to show up and do the job, that you're not a drunk or a drug addict, or they're not going to find you on the floor of the hotel, and they want that you basically meet your deadlines and get something in that's worthwhile.
There goes the poets. They're out. That's so interesting. So there's an element, in other words, of professionalism, not just in terms of your ability to write, but also in your ability to get that meeting and to make that meeting seem impressive and important to somebody else.
And they have a problem that they want you to help them solve, which is they need to bring out films. In television, they need to fill time, they need to fill space, and they're hoping that your idea is going to do that for them.
Right. Have you written for television also?
I've written films for television, but I haven't written any episodic TV.
Okay. Is that a different genre, or is that just your choice not to do that?
It's less different than they think it is. But usually there's a major separation between writing a feature film and writing an episodic TV show. If you go to sell a television show and all you have is film experience, you're wise to go out with a producer who's got television experience or something like that, because because so much money is involved and so much time, they hesitate to take in somebody who's a novice at that, even if you've won the Nobel Prize for screenwriting, although there isn't
one. So you live in New York, Ross, and you never venture beyond the Bronx, I take it, except for residencies at Wilkes-Barre. Isn't this about Hollywood? Don't you have to be in Hollywood?
Well, there were a couple of years where I was bi-coastal, so to speak. I was out in Hollywood probably 2 weeks, almost every month, at least a week to 2 weeks every month. But you can, and if you want to be in the standard film business, studio film business, you're probably wise, if you're young, to move out to the West Coast and try to get into the business out there. In New York, there is a vibrant independent film circle. It goes, waxes and wanes between vibrant and on life support.
Okay.
So it depends what's going on, but there are plenty of films made in New York.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, I know. I see some of the trucks outside, and they mess up with the parking.
Absolutely.
You people have nobody paying for my parking over here, Ross. But actually, I'm curious too about the current state. I mean, has the pandemic made film making impossible, more difficult, more necessary, all of the above?
The business is in kind of chaos at this point. It's made it extremely difficult. Most of the films being made are going directly to streaming, Netflix, Amazon Prime. There are problems, health problems, or precautions that have to be taken on the set. I recently was talking to an actress, a friend of mine, who said she had shot a film in upstate New York, and so what was that like with the pandemic? She said, checked for COVID every day, temperature taken every day, everybody stayed away from one another. And she said, and then there was one love scene where she had to kiss her leading man, and she said they looked at each other, and it was kind of like, we'll see what happens.
Oh,
yeah.
Right.
But everybody was fine, but she said they really watched out for them.
Yes. Wow. So we have streaming and Netflix. I mean, it's impossible to predict, I suppose. But for yourself, and where do you see the future of filmmaking, and what trends would you be excited about, and which ones do you fear?
As near as I can see, I mean, I'm not the best prognosticator of business, but it seems to me that things are have been moving steadily towards forms of streaming, and that this sort of just exacerbated the process and accelerated it.
Sure.
Because once you can have, I mean, the experience of going out to a film to see it is terrific. But also, if you have a 65-inch television in your home, you don't have to go out anywhere. That's quite a bit of competition.
Right, right, right. Well, this is great. I would love to have time to talk about Schmuck, which I want to promote as a wonderful novel. It came out in 2018, and we're still, in fact, we were hoping that you would be able to record an audiobook.
Yeah.
Because you also do voices, and you did one of our books in the Cemetery of the Orange Trees. Wonderful audio production of that, and we would be delighted to be able to listen to Schmuck someday. And I suppose we'll have to wait until the doors open again.
Right. Right.
But that'll be first on the list.
Okay. I look forward to it.
Thank you so much, Ross Klavan.
Thank you, Phil. It was wonderful to talk to you.
Likewise, and stay safe.
You too.